The woman who never aged. There are stories the land refuses to forget. This one is about a woman who came one winter and never left. Not in body nor in legend. Subscribe the channel to get more stories. Let's begin. The fog that night did not roll in from the moors. It crept. It came crawling like a thing that remembered how to breathe, slow and deliberate, wrapping its pale fingers around every chimney, every frozen gate, every silent window in the village of Ashcombe Hollow. The moon hid itself. The dogs whimpered, and from the mist came the sound of hooves, soft, measured, like heartbeats echoing across a grave. Old men still swear the first thing they saw was the horse, black as cellar soot, steaming though no warmth escaped its nostrils. Its eyes glowed faintly amber, too knowing, too still. And astride it Lydia Harrow. No one knew her name that night, but they say it felt familiar, like a song once sung by someone long dead. Her hair gleamed white gold in the dark, her dress thin as mist untouched by frost. She smiled when she passed, and every shutter she passed shivered in its hinges. When she reached the square, the bell in the church tower, long rusted, long silent, gave a single sound. A note like a knell. Then silence. They called her the stranger from the storm, and yet she brought no storm, only stillness. The innkeeper, Thomas Gray, offered her a room before his wife could stop him. Lydia accepted with a nod, her voice low. Just for a night, perhaps two. But Thomas would later swear, trembling before the priest, that when he handed her the key, her skin was warm like spring earth, though the air around her was colder than snow. Inside the inn, the fire sputtered when she approached. Candles stretched their flames toward her like hands, and when she smiled at the other guests, each one forgot the word they'd been about to say. Strange weather, murmured one old farmer. Watching frost form on his mug, Lydia only whispered, "It follows where it's remembered," and no one dared to ask what she meant. Subscribe if you want the truth of what came next. That night Ashcombe slept restlessly. The fog never lifted. Every rooster crowed at midnight. Some swore they heard footsteps pacing outside their doors, soft, deliberate like a woman in heavy skirts dragging her hem through snow. Others dreamt of the same face, pale, smiling faintly, lips whispering names no one had told her. By dawn the fog had thinned enough to reveal the hoofprints leading to the edge of the woods, and stopping there. No return trail, only a single silver thread of hair caught on a branch, glinting in the new sun. The priest declared her an omen, of what he would not say. The blacksmith called her beautiful, until his forge went cold that afternoon, though the coals were still glowing. The children watched her pass from behind fences, whispering a rhyme they swore they'd never been taught. White as winter, black as crow, Lydia walks where no fires go. By the second evening, the fog had returned, thicker, heavier. From the churchyard, one could see her lantern bobbing between the graves as she walked, murmuring softly, almost lovingly, to the stones. The villagers whispered she was searching for someone. A husband, a grave, a promise? But there were no graves old enough for the names she spoke, not even in the oldest record. Some began to think she wasn't searching for the dead. She was counting them. Thomas Gray's wife claimed to have seen her from the upper window that night, standing at the frozen well in the square. Not moving, not breathing, just listening, as if the water below was speaking back. When asked what she heard, Lydia smiled and said, "It remembers me." No one asked again. By the third night, every candle in Ashcombe burned lower than it should have. Milk soured. Clocks stopped. The blacksmith's youngest woke screaming that someone was combing her hair with ice. When his mother ran to him, she found only a single golden hair across his pillow, and the faintest scent of lavender. That morning, Lydia Harrow bought the abandoned manor on Blackthorn Hill, paid in coins that looked new, but were minted a century ago. When Thomas asked how she came to possess such things, she smiled with a softness that made him step back. "You forget," she said. "I've always been here, and though he could not say why, he believed her. Snow began to fall that day, and slow, heavy flakes that refused to melt even on the hearth. The villagers shut their doors and prayed, but prayer felt thin in the air. Some said the fog had a heartbeat now. Others said it whispered. The road to the village grew quieter day by day. Travelers who came through spoke of a woman on a black horse who watched from the tree line but never approached. When one traveler, a scholar, tried to follow her, his horse returned without him, rein stiff with frost. No body was found. Only the sound of hooves fading into the fog, and a single voice humming an old tune, one no one remembered learning. By the year's end, Ashcombe Hollow had grown smaller, dimmer, more withdrawn. But the manor on Blackthorn Hill glowed each night with warm light and music no one dared listen to. And sometimes, when the fog rolled low, the villagers saw her silhouette at the window, brushing her golden hair, looking not out, but down, at nothing. Or perhaps at us. The wind in the trees carried her name long after that winter ended. Lydia Harrow. They said she came through the fog, pale and smiling, and left no footprints. But the land still carries the weight of her arrival. No one built the manor. It was found. One morning, just beyond the frozen meadows, a shape appeared through the fog. Gables, chimneys, windows black as blind eyes. The villagers swore the hill had been bare the night before. Now a house stood there, ancient and whole, with ivy coiled around its stone like veins. The doors were already open. The hearth was already lit, and Lydia Harrow walked inside as if returning home. Ashcombe Hollow lay silent beneath its thin crust of snow. The church bell had rusted again. The priest refused to climb its tower. He claimed in a trembling voice that he'd heard someone singing up there at midnight, a woman's voice humming through the iron. The villagers tried not to look toward the hill, but their eyes betrayed them. They said the house changed shape when one wasn't looking, windows shifting, eaves drooping, the whole roof breathing faintly, as if exhaling the fog. And when the light struck just so, the reflection in the upstairs glass was not the house at all, but the forest, a mirror image that never moved with the wind. Lydia's arrival had made the air colder, but her presence in that house made the earth itself uneasy. Roots rose from the ground, twisting toward her doorstep. Crows began to perch along the fence, their heads always tilted, watching the chimney. Every night at the same hour, the windows flickered with lamplight, and a violin played a tune too mournful for human hands. No one saw her buy wood or food or candles, yet the house never dimmed. Children whispered that the manor fed on something else, warmth, memory, perhaps even the years themselves. Thomas Gray, guilt gnawing at him, was the first to climb the hill. He told no one why, only that he owed her a kindness. He took with him a loaf of bread and his lantern. He was seen walking into the fog but not coming back. By dawn the bread lay frozen at the gate, untouched. The lantern burned still, but the flame inside was blue. On the fourth night, Martha, the blacksmith's widow, heard knocking from her well. Soft, rhythmic, polite. When she leaned over the edge, she saw the reflection of the manor shimmering on the surface, though the real hill stood miles away. Then she saw Lydia's face beside her own, smiling faintly. The water rippled and the reflection vanished. Lydia began to appear in the village again. At dawn, at dusk, or when the fog sank low, she spoke with the children as if she'd known their grandparents. She asked strange questions. Do you still keep the stone circle beyond the mill? Or has the river moved since the last thaw? When one man asked where she came from, she paused for a long time and said, From the place your shadow forgets to fall. No one asked again. That winter, no snow melted. Fires hissed low and weak, even in the church. The priest wrote in his journal, found much later in the ruins, that he dreamt of the manor stretching higher every night, its chimneys reaching for the clouds. He heard whispers under his floorboards, She is mending the house. And when he woke, his walls were wet with frost from the inside. One night a group of men climbed the hill with torches, determined to face her. They said they would ask her to leave, though none could name where she should go. From the village, people watched the flames approach the manor gates, then stop. Not extinguished, frozen. The next morning the hill was bare again, the house gone. Only the snow remained, shaped faintly like a foundation. But that night, the windows reappeared, one by one, glowing faintly in the fog, like eyes opening in the dark. By spring the ground thawed, and the first flowers rose from the soil around Blackthorn Hill. Pale white blooms no one had seen before. They grew in perfect circles, small and trembling, their stems dripping with dew that smelled faintly of lavender, and when the wind moved through them, it carried a sound like slow breathing, a sigh perhaps, or laughter. The villagers stopped climbing the hill after that, but from the valley below they could sometimes see her, Lydia Harrow, standing by the upstairs window, her hands resting on the sill, her eyes fixed on the village below, as if she were waiting for something, or counting. The painter came in spring when the thaw revealed strange things beneath the melting snow. He was a quiet man, young, with hands too delicate for the roughness of Ashcombe Hollow. His name was Ambrose Keene, and he had heard whispers of Lydia Harrow long before he reached the village. He claimed he had dreamt her face before ever seeing it, pale still, and perfectly alive in his sleep. The villagers warned him not to go near Blackthorn Hill. He only smiled and said, "Beauty belongs to those who can endure it." By dusk, he was climbing the frost-bitten slope with his easel on his back. The mist opened for him like a curtain. Lydia greeted him at the door. Her voice, he would later write in his diary, carried the hush of falling snow. She led him into a room where sunlight never fully reached, dim, golden, filled with the scent of lavender and old paper. "You wish to paint me," she said, "if you'll allow it. Then you must promise to finish what you begin." "No matter what it shows," he promised, though he did not yet understand the weight of it. The room was strange. Shadows gathered in the corners, even when no candle burned. The fireplace glowed softly, yet gave off no heat. And behind Lydia hung another portrait, face turned toward the wall, canvas cracked and curling. He noticed it only once, for she shifted to block it as he set up his paints. For 3 days he painted. She never moved, never blinked, her stillness perfect as marble. Sometimes, when he stepped back to rest his eyes, he thought her lips were parted slightly, as if whispering. Her eyes, though, her eyes changed with each stroke. He swore the colors would not hold. Every time he painted them, the pigment dulled, then darkened, as if the canvas itself drank the light. He asked to rest. She refused softly. "It must be finished before the moon changes, or you'll never see me the same again." So he worked by candlelight, though the candles burned lower than they should have. He dipped his brush into his paints, but each time he looked up, the jar of turpentine was a little lower, the air thicker, and Lydia's reflection in the glass shimmered faintly, smiling when she was not. On the final night, Ambrose found her already waiting in the room, though he swore he'd locked the doors. She sat beneath the window, her skin pale with a glow not of the lamp, her dress whispering faintly, though no wind stirred. He painted through the night, every breath shallow, every motion haunted by the feeling that he was being watched not by one woman, but by many. The painting began to change beneath his hands, her features sharpening, her gaze deepening until he felt pinned by it. He whispered, "It's as if you're breathing." Lydia smiled faintly. "Do not stop now." And he didn't, not until he reached her eyes. When he painted them, the room fell silent. Even the clock in the hall stopped ticking. He blinked once, and the eyes on the canvas blinked back. The candle beside him went out. By dawn, the painting stood finished. Lydia looked at it for a long while, her expression unreadable. Admiration, sorrow, hunger all at once. Ambrose stepped forward to sign his name. But before his brush touched the canvas, she whispered almost kindly, "That won't be necessary." He turned, startled, but she was already gone. The door behind him was open, though the hinges hadn't made a sound. When the villagers climbed the hill 2 days later, they found the house empty. The easel stood in the parlour, the painting upon it dry, though it had rained all night. Ambrose was nowhere to be found. His footprints led to the doorway and stopped there, as if he'd stepped into the air. The portrait, however, was perfect. Lydia Harrow, serene, eternal, eyes bright with life. Too bright. As the days passed, the villagers swore her expression changed, ever so slightly. A tilt of the lips, a narrowing of the eyes, a look that seemed to follow from every angle. When one of them tried to cover it with a cloth, the fabric slid off overnight. When the priest attempted to move it, the frame grew too heavy to lift, and then one morning the canvas was gone. Only the faint scent of lavender lingered. And upon the wall where the portrait had hung, a thin smear of colour remained, the impression of a handprint, wet, still fresh. They say the manor's windows glow faintly on nights with no moon, and if one stands by the gate long enough, the reflection of the portrait appears in the glass, her face perfect, eternal, and smiling a little wider each time. It began with whispers in the nursery, small feathered voices, half asleep, speaking her name, Lydia. At first the mothers thought their children were mimicking the grown-ups' gossip, repeating tales they should never have heard. But soon every home in Ashcombe Hollow began to echo with the same soft chant. Every night at the same hour, the children dreamed of her. They spoke of her visits with untroubled certainty. "She comes when the fog presses the windows," little Clara Finch told her mother. "She brushes my hair and sings." When asked what song, the girl hummed a tune too old for memory, something the priest later recognized from a hymnal burned a century ago for heresy. Another child claimed Lydia had given her a gift, a single white petal placed on her pillow, cold to the touch, that melted into nothing by dawn. By the end of that week, every child in the village had one of those petals. The doctor said it was collective hysteria, the kind that spreads through places too small and too poor to dream properly. He wrote neat notes in his book, drank his brandy, and locked his doors at sunset. But the next morning, he was found asleep at his desk, face pale, lips blue, eyes still moving beneath the lids, as though he were still dreaming. The brandy in his glass had frozen solid. In their sleep, the children began to sing together. Those who heard them said it sounded like a choir under water, the notes stretched thin and trembling. Their parents tried to wake them, but each time they did, the children cried, wept as though ripped from something beautiful. "She was telling us secrets," one boy whispered, eyes unfocused. "About the things under the hill." "What things?" his mother demanded. "The roots," he said, smiling faintly. "They have faces now." The priest forbade anyone to speak her name aloud after that, but names have their own ways of being remembered. The fog thickened as if listening. One evening, a little girl named Elsie wandered out into the mist barefoot, humming Lydia's song. They found her at dawn, sitting in the frost outside the manor gate, eyes open and unblinking. When her father gathered her in his arms, she whispered, "She said she missed me." Elsie never grew after that day. For years to come, her hair stayed the same length, her hands the same small size, as though time itself had forgotten her. The children stopped dreaming of Lydia after midsummer. Instead, they began to speak like her. Calm, deliberate, their voices a little too deep, their eyes distant, as if remembering something they had not yet lived. When they looked at the fog, they smiled, and sometimes, if one stood at the edge of the village just before dawn, one could see her figure among them, a tall, pale woman walking hand in hand with the little ones, her dress brushing softly over the frost, leaving no prints. By morning, the snow around the houses was covered in small footprints that led nowhere, and the children awoke with grey strands in their hair. That winter, Lydia Harrow brought laughter back to Ashcombe Hollow, or so it seemed. The snow had come early, laying its pale veil over the roofs and lanes, burying the sins of the year beneath a glittering stillness. Lydia appeared in the square one morning, cloaked in white, her hair unbound, her smile a promise. She announced a festival, a celebration of endurance, of winter's beauty. No one remembered deciding to attend, yet when the night came, every villager stood beneath the lanterns strung between the trees. The fog shimmered with candlelight, the air tasted sweet, and the silence felt almost kind. Lydia stood at the center, her gloved hands folded, her eyes bright as glass. "Tonight," she said, "we honor what does not die." The musicians began to play, slow, mournful strings that bent and warped in the cold air. Couples danced upon the frost, their breaths misting, their laughter echoing thinly against the frozen sky. Some said Lydia danced too, drifting among them, her gown swirling like smoke, her shadow always a moment behind her feet. As the night deepened, the snow thickened, falling faster, heavier. Yet no one felt cold. They danced with a strange fever, cheeks flushed, eyes bright, hearts quickening. Then just before midnight the music stopped. The last note hung in the air too long. Lydia raised her hand. The wind obeyed. Every flake of snow froze mid-air, caught in its descent, shimmering in the torchlight like suspended stars. The villagers stood still, half smiling, half afraid. Someone tried to speak, but no sound came. The air itself seemed held in her grasp. "You've danced so beautifully," she whispered. "Now be still with me." Her voice echoed through the stillness like a lullaby. When morning came, the square was empty. Only frost remained, thick, unmelting, sculpted in strange, graceful forms. Hands clasped, faces lifted, bodies frozen mid-step. The snow never melted that year. Not in spring, not even in summer. The ground stayed white, silent, eternal, and on clear nights, when the moon touched the ice just right, the villagers who remained swore they could see shapes moving within, faint, shifting shadows locked beneath the surface, dancing. He arrived from London, all charm and arrogance, his coat too fine for the mud of Ashcombe Hollow. His name was Jonathan Hale, a poet whose verses had once graced the pages of the Albion Review. He came, he said, to write about the legend of the ageless woman, but what he found on Blackthorn Hill silenced his pen and soured his voice. When he first saw Lydia Harrow, she stood in her garden among the pale flowers that never wilted. The air around her shimmered faintly, like heat rising from stone. She turned when he spoke her name, though he had not yet spoken it aloud. "You seek a story," she said. "Perhaps," he answered, smiling. "Or a muse." Muses always take more than they give. Her words should have been a warning. He mistook them for poetry. Jonathan began visiting her daily. He brought her books, roses, and the warmth of his laughter, the sort of noise the manor had long forgotten. Lydia accepted each gift with polite amusement, but never with surprise. It was as if she had seen it all before. She listened as he read aloud by the fire, the light tracing her unchanging face. He noticed her never blinking, never moving to turn the page. Her stillness both comforted and unnerved him. When he asked her why she lived alone, she smiled softly. "I do not live alone," she said. "I live with time." As weeks passed, Jonathan's affection grew into worship. He wrote verses about her hair, her hands, her silence. He told himself he loved her mystery, but truly he loved what she reflected, a version of himself untouched by decay. He begged her to come away with him, to leave the grey village and its whispers. She refused gently, saying, "Love does not carry me forward, Jonathan. It only circles back." That night he dreamt he stood before a mirror that did not show his face, only hers. And when he awoke, a lock of his hair had turned white. Still he returned, desperate, trembling with something deeper than passion. He fell to his knees before her, promising to grow old beside her, to write her immortality into words no one could burn away. Lydia touched his cheek with a tenderness colder than snow. "You already have," she whispered. "In every century," he laughed, uncertain. "What do you mean?" Her eyes darkened. "You never remember. The next morning his horse was found wandering the moor, reins tangled, its saddle dusted with frost. Jonathan's coat lay near the garden gate, stiff and rimed with ice. They found no body, only his notebook, open to a final, half-frozen page. Her lips were warm. The rest of the world was not. The villagers burned his belongings, hoping to break whatever hold she had, but his words lingered. And when the wind blew from the hill, it carried faint echoes of poetry. The same lines he'd written, repeated in a woman's voice, soft and unending. The mirror hung in the upper hall of Blackthorn Manor, tall and narrow, framed in black oak carved with symbols too old for scripture. It had stood there long before Lydia came, or perhaps it had come with her. No one was certain anymore. For years it reflected everything faithfully, her gowns, her candles, her endless quiet. Until one evening in early autumn, it cracked. The sound echoed through the house like a pistol shot. Lydia stood before it untouched, watching her fractured reflection shimmer in the candlelight. "You lasted longer than the rest," she murmured. From that night onward, the mirror refused her image. When she walked past, the glass went dark, as though remembering something it wished to forget. Servants she'd taken in from the village whispered that sometimes in the black glass they saw a woman still standing there. But she was not Lydia. This other woman's eyes were wide with fear, her hands pressed against the inside of the mirror as though trying to escape. Lydia ordered the hall sealed. Dust gathered thick as wool, but the mirror stayed clear, too clear. Even with no one to polish it, the glass gleamed like water under moonlight. Visitors said they could hear faint tapping behind the wall, rhythmic and patient as though something inside was counting. One night, a storm broke over Ashcombe Hollow. The thunder shook the manor, lightning clawed the sky, and for the first time in decades the sealed door flew open. The servants, huddled in their quarters, heard a sound like a woman sobbing and glass grinding against stone. When the storm passed, Lydia descended the stairs with blood on her hands, thin lines across her palms, like from shattered glass. "The mirror will hold me no longer," she said softly. "Now it remembers too much." After that, no mirror in the house worked properly. Some showed her as an old woman, others as a shadow with hollow eyes. One even showed her standing outside in the garden, staring back through the glass. The servants began to leave one by one. The last to go swore she saw two Lydias that night, one walking away from the manor, the other watching from the window above. By morning the window was broken, and the hall stood empty. Only the mirror remained, and whole again, but no longer reflecting anything at all. Those who dared to look into it later claimed they could see faint shapes moving within the depthless black. A pale hand, a ripple, a whisper, and the faintest sound of someone breathing on the other side. No one alive in Ashcombe Hollow recalls ever hearing the church bells at midnight. They were rusted, frozen in place, the ropes long since rotted away. But on the 12th night after the mirror cracked, their sound rolled down from the hill, not rung by hands, but by something that remembered the rhythm of prayer. The villagers woke to that hollow chime, 12 tolls heavy as breath in winter glass. The sound carried through fields and frozen hedgerows, through the bones of the manor and the graveyard behind it, and with each toll, a light flickered in the tower, pale, sickly, the colour of bone left too long in the rain. The rector, old Father Merrin, stumbled barefoot to the church, clutching his cross and muttering the names of saints long dead. He swore the great doors opened before he touched them. Inside, the air was full of dust and cold, and the faint perfume of lavender, the same scent Lydia Harrow left behind wherever she walked. The bells above still swung, though no ropes hung from the rafters. Their sound was not right, each strike echoing half a beat too late, like an echo trapped inside time itself. At the altar, a single thing rested, a mirror shard, no larger than a coin. It pulsed faintly in the candlelight, beating like a heart. When Father Merrin bent to touch it, the bells stopped, and in the silence he heard a woman whisper, "You should have let me sleep." He ran, He never made it home. They found him the next morning at the edge of the hollow, eyes white, his mouth frozen open in a silent scream. The cross he carried had melted into his palm, and from the church tower faint smoke curled, though nothing inside had burned. By the third night every bell in Ashcombe rang. Not just the church, the old schoolhouse, the clock tower, even the ships moored miles away on the coast. Each tone struck the same hollow pattern, 12 chimes, 12 names, 12 winters. The villagers realized the sound was counting something. And when the wind carried the 13th toll, every candle in the village went out at once. They said the fog rolled in after that, and in its heart, someone was walking barefoot, humming a hymn no one alive remembered. When the fog lifted, Ashcombe Hollow was changed. The crops that had withered for years now stood tall and silvered, the wheat bending under the weight of dew that gleamed like mercury. The villagers should have rejoiced, but the fields were silent. No birds, no crickets, no life. Only that new pale grain whispering secrets in the wind. The first to harvest it was Thomas Grigg, a farmer too poor to ignore miracles. He carried a sickle into the field and began to cut. But when he returned home, his wife swore he was not the same. His skin was cold. His eyes were distant. When he slept, his breath came in uneven murmurs, as though whispering someone else's dreams. Within days, others followed. They said Lydia Harrow's curse had turned to blessing, that she had tamed the soil itself. The village thrived again, but no one noticed that the shadows in the fields grew longer every day, even at noon. At dusk, children began speaking to the shadows. They said they were learning the names. When their parents asked whose, the children smiled and said, "The ones beneath the roots." By the week's end, the grain had darkened to grey. When ground into flour, it made bread that never spoiled, but it tasted faintly of iron and ash. Those who ate it began to dream of mirrors, of hands clawing from beneath the soil. One evening, as the harvest moon rose, the fields began to hum. The sound was deep, vibrating through the earth, a song sung from underground. The villagers gathered, torches in hand, as the grain bowed all at once toward the manor on Blackthorn Hill, and there she stood, Lydia Harrow, pale as starlight, her gown trailing through the stalks. "The land remembers me," she said softly. "It always does." The villagers fell to their knees. Some prayed, some wept. But those who met her gaze saw their own faces flicker, older, then younger, then gone. A woman screamed as her shadow detached, moving on its own toward the manor. The torches went out one by one, snuffed by breath none could see. The humming deepened until it was no longer sound but pressure, the groan of earth remembering the weight of its dead. When dawn came, the fields were bare. Only footprints remained, hundreds of them, all leading uphill. And in the manor's doorway, Lydia stood alone again, waiting. The manor stands empty now, though no one dares to go near it after dark. Its windows glow faintly, even with no fire within, as though the walls themselves remember light. They say the air around it hums, low and constant, like the sound of distant bees or the heartbeat of something buried too deep to die. But inside, dust does not gather. The candles never burn down, and on the walls of the great hall, 12 portraits hang in perfect stillness. Each one shows a face the village remembers, the rector, the poet, the farmer, the child, all who vanished when Lydia returned. Their eyes are open, watching. Their skin looks soft, almost breathing. There is space for one more. Lydia Harrow wanders those corridors still. Her footsteps make no sound. Her reflection no longer graces any surface. She carries a lantern that burns with no flame, a soft silver light that clings to her like memory. Sometimes she pauses before the portraits, tilting her head as if listening. If you were close enough, you might hear faint whispers from the canvas, pleading, bargaining, sometimes calling her name. You said it would end. You said the 13th would free us. Lydia only smiles. A weary, distant smile, like someone remembering an old promise she never made. In the center of the hall stands an easel draped with black cloth. Beneath it lies an unfinished canvas, blank save for the faint outline of a face that has yet to appear. Each midnight the outline darkens. Each morning it grows sharper. By the 12th night the villagers said they could see the eyes. No one admits it aloud, but they know those eyes. They have seen them before. In mirrors, in dreams, in fleeting glances over their shoulders. They are the eyes of whoever dares to speak Lydia's name too many times. One evening, a young girl, curious, foolish, wandered up the hill with a lantern. She wanted proof of the tales. They found the lantern days later, still burning by the gate. Inside the manor, the 13th portrait was finished. Her face, perfect, terrified, eternal. And Lydia Harrow, she stands now among the others, watching the portraits watch her. Her beauty is unchanged, but her expression is not peace, it is longing, perhaps regret, perhaps hunger. When the wind moves through the broken windows, the portraits tremble as though breathing. Sometimes when lightning strikes over Ashcombe Hollow, villagers swear they can see the glow of 13 faces in the manor windows, shining faintly, as if lit from within. At the very heart of the hall, the black-draped easel stands empty again, waiting because the curse of Lydia. Harrow was never that she would live forever, but that forever would keep living through her, and somewhere in the hollow night, a whisper moves through the fog, soft as silk and cold as morning. The 13th is never the last.